Hello, I'm really pleased to be able to join you today and talk about playing to learn in the early years. Alex, did you want to say anything before we start?
Sure. So we're happy to have Dr. Dawn Sark here, who she has worked at the Preschool Physical Literacy Research Team at the Mount Royal University of Mount Royal in Calgary, and she has been teaching there for the last 22 years and has done extensive research around the Apple model, the physical literacy observation tool, the hop, skip, and jump manual, and we're excited to have her here today to share some of her expertise and experience with physical literacy in the early years. So with that, over to you, Dawn.
Okay, thanks. So just wanted to indicate who the RBC Learn to Play partners are and what's available in terms of the suite of communication tools and the website there. All right, we're going to talk about playing to learn. And you'll notice that I've switched RBC's title around from Learn to Play, because for young children, for preschool children, playing is something that almost all children know how to do. They don't need to be taught how to play or to learn to play. There are some examples where children have challenges learning to play. Children perhaps who have various types of disabilities or children who have been traumatized. So I've switched it around in this webinar because young children use play in order to learn. So if you remember your own childhood, those of you who are maybe a little bit older than 20 or 30 may remember that you had endless hours of playing outside. You did all kinds of things that are now considered very risky and dangerous, like climbing trees, and you fell a lot and scraped your knees, and you tested your limits, but you learned how to get along with others, and you were growing and developing and learning as part of that process. But we're coming to think now about what happened in those early years. Those years we remember back to times of great fun, and we remember them fondly. But really, we used to think that those first 5 years were just a time to play, and play wasn't really important. It was just playing while you were waiting for the real life of school and work and family to come. A lot of research has shown that adults come to think of child development those first 5 or 6 years as almost a black box. You know, babies go into this box at birth and they come out at 5 ready for school. There seems to be a general lack of understanding around what happens during those early years. And if things either went well or they didn't, and who knows why? Was it your parents that made the difference, your genes? And now we've got this amazing scientific evidence that's happening in the last, probably 15 years, as we've developed non-invasive techniques to actually look inside our brain and see what's happening. We've learned that the first 5 years are an intense period of brain development, the most intense, actually, in our entire lives. In fact, we now know that because of this extensive brain development, the first 5 years actually sets the trajectory for our entire life. What happens to us in our first 5 years determines what the rest of our life will look like. So child development leads to healthy brain development, which leads to the development of resilience, something that we're talking a lot about lately. And all of that leads to healthy, happy, productive lives. So I'm going to give you a very, very abbreviated Brain Development 101 course because I actually teach an entire university course on it. So here we're only going to do a very abbreviated version, but what should everyone know about the first 5 years of a child's life? This is probably my very favorite slide ever. So on the left, at birth, you see a few little synapses. So synapses are connections in your brain. The big lumps that you see in that slide on the left, those are the neurons or the brain cells. And at birth, only a very few of those are actually connected, so that when a baby is born, he is able to breathe, to swallow, to suck, to swallow, to cry, a little bit around maintaining his temperament, but really, or temperature, but there's really very little in terms of control of body. From the moment of birth, the child actually develops 1 million brain connections per second. Think about that for a minute. 1 million new connections are made in a child's brain every second for the first 5 or 6 years of life. So that leads us to what the middle slide looks like. And there you can see a child's brain at 6 years old. It is more dense, it has more connections than it will ever have in the rest of its life. Super powerful. What it shows us is that a child has endless possibilities in terms of what he or she will be able to do. We talk about the ability to learn languages in those first 6 years. And those of you who speak more than one language, if you learned a second or a third language in your first 6 years of life, you're probably fortunate enough to be able to speak those languages with a native accent. People wouldn't know that that was not your first language. Those of us who learned French or other second languages later on in school will always speak that second language with a little bit of a foreign accent. It will never sound natural. But that 6-year-old brain, if you look at that, it's very, very complex. So it's as if we had so many different roadways in our brain that the brain is inefficient. And those of you who know toddlers or young children, for example, you can say, stop, and they'll take 5 or 6 steps before they'll actually stop. Because the brain has so many connections and it's so complex that it's not very efficient, and it takes a long time for messages to pass through that brain. So in order to be an efficient, effective, productive brain, we need to prune away unnecessary connections, just as we would prune a bush in our garden. So the old adage that you've heard, use it or lose it, is absolutely true. So all these connections are made in a young child's brain. And if they don't use those connections for whatever reason, the brain actually prunes those connections away. So you see the 14-year-old brain has way fewer connections than the 6-year-old brain, but that brain is much more efficient, it's much faster, and it recovers after use more quickly. So that brain can process about 100 times faster than the 6-year-old brain can. But think about this issue of pruning. If you don't use something, you lose it. Doesn't mean that it's lost forever. Your brain is incredibly plastic and able to adjust and readjust and build again. But it will always be harder and it will take more time. So in terms of physical activity and physical literacy, if children are sedentary in those first 6 years of life, all the possibilities for the amazing uses of their bodies may be pruned away. Again, it doesn't mean that it's gone forever. It just means that it will be harder to develop. It will take more time when they're older. So if we can build within the first 6 years of a child's life the ability to use their body in many clever ways, they'll be much better for it. By the way, the pruning process that starts in early childhood continues for the rest of your life. So when you get to be my age in your 60s and you feel like you're losing your mind, yes, you literally are. Building a brain is like building a house. So we know that the early childhood years are the time when a really solid, firm foundation is necessary. If we built a house on a rocky field without clearing the rocks, or in a marsh, or on the side of a steep hill, the chances of that house being able to stand for a lifetime would be very slim. And it's exactly the same with building the foundations of a child's brain. If we can provide the proper experiences and relationships for a child during those first 6 years, that brain will go strong and last for the child's life. We think about 4 walls of a house. And those four walls are the four main areas of development that we talk about in early childhood: cognitive, social, emotional, and physical. You notice the picture of the brain. The brain develops from the brainstem up and then finally forward. So the first things at birth are just the reflexive things that you saw in that slide of the brain at birth. The midbrain is where we begin to build language, that's cognitive. Social, where we learn to get along with our friends and we learn how to share. Emotional, where we learn to regulate our emotions, where we learn that it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to kick your friends when you're angry. And physical, how do we use our bodies? Because physical development is more than just growing taller and gaining weight. It's actually learning how to use and control our body in a variety of different ways. The fifth area of development is spiritual, and we consider that to be the hearth or the heart of the house. The other thing that's important about this, we are finding with a lot of our super moms, super parents, they want their children to be ready for school. And they think that being ready for school means that they know how to read and write before they're 5. They focus on the cognitive development of a child in the preschool years. But if you think about building a house, if you have a very big, strong cognitive wall on one side of the house, but the other 3 walls are really weak and short, you don't have a strong house. So in other words, you can't do one of those things without doing all of the others in order to create a strong brain. The other thing that's important when we think about a growing brain is a set of mental skills. And these are considered soft skills that your brain develops. It's called the executive function. These skills begin at about age 2, begin developing about age 2. And believe it or not, they are the last set of skills to develop in the brain. They're housed in what's called your prefrontal cortex, so the front part of your brain right above your eyebrows, your forehead area. They involve these 3 skills. So working memory is where you can hold a number of things in your mind until later. So with a toddler, for example, we can say as the toddler comes into childcare, please take off your boots and hang up your coat. And that's about all they'll be able to hold in their working memory. By the time the child is 5, we can say, please take off your boots, hang up your coat in your cubby, choose your favorite book, and meet me on the carpet. So they're holding many more things in their memory. As adults, we have an incredible ability to hold a great deal in our working memory. And that's important for us to function in day-to-day life. Inhibitory control is the same sort of thing as emotional self-regulation. And you can probably think of several adults in your life who maybe need a little bit more inhibitory control. We can think about people who have road rage on the roads, for example, as lacking inhibitory control. People who can't take frustrations, who can't deal with stress well. Those are really important skills to allow us to get along in the world. In cognitive or mental flexibility, this is where you change your plans. You have a plan, you start it, you realize you're coming up to some roadblocks, and then you have to change that plan. I don't live in Calgary anymore, but I do work in Calgary, and Calgary has a terrible traffic problem. We don't have a good transit system. We don't have a good system of roads. We're set up to be a vehicle society, and we have to have a lot of cognitive flexibility if we're going to get to work on time because of all the traffic jams. If you think of what physical activity or physical literacy can teach us in this area of mental skills, this is where the importance of introducing physical literacy in early childhood becomes part of the challenge or part of the positive thing that we want to be thinking about. So an executive function for young children is like an air traffic control system. So if you think of the air traffic controllers at the airport, they're needing to focus and pay attention on your plane coming in. They need to ignore distractions of somebody asking them if they want coffee or the headache that they have or their spouse who's phoning through. They need to plan how they're going to bring all these planes down safely, and they need to respond to changing circumstances like the blizzard that just blew in or the high winds that are coming. So this is an important piece of developing brains. And when you think of young children, and I think particularly of activities like U5 soccer, and there are some children who are rolling down the hill or laying under the trees picking the dandelions or looking at the birds in the sky and not paying any attention to the coach. That's because their executive function skills have not developed well enough for them to be in that particular situation. The other thing, as I mentioned off the top, that we're getting really interested in is how do we enhance resilience? Because we're learning that resilience is what allows us to address adversity throughout our lifetimes. And for some of you, just looking at the picture of those children playing may get your teeth cringing and you think, oh, not in my backyard, they're not, or not in my child care center, they won't. But we know that resilience develops only when you have a chance to address adversity or to take risks. You need to know that you have the skills to handle a risk, to know what your own boundaries are, to test yourself. So, for example, when we talk about active energetic play, we talk about that as being running, jumping, climbing. But risky play is play maybe that pushes you beyond what you would normally do. So it encourages you to run a little faster, to jump a little further, to climb a little higher. You learn how to manage risks and develop resilience. So all of this stuff about emerging brain development we know, and you've seen all of this stuff before, but why, now that we've known this brain development and the importance of child development, are 35% of our children aged 2 to 5 in Canada overweight and obesity, or obese? Why is that? We know that young children, and several surveys across Canada have indicated that young children are inactive or sedentary for more than 75% of their waking day. Part of that is due to restraints. They're in car seats, they're in strollers, high chairs, walkers, various things that don't allow them to be active. But 75% of their waking day? And we're also very, very aware that even young children are becoming attached to screen time, to TV, smartphones, tablets, laptops. So why is this happening? We know what we need to do for our children, and yet, well, we go back to this black box about child development. There is a general lack of knowledge. In Alberta, we've conducted a study twice, once in 2007, again in 2013, called the Benchmark Study, where we asked adults all across Alberta, those who have something to do with children, whether they're parents or they work with children, they have children in their lives somehow, what they know about child development. Between 2007 and 2013, there were a number of things that were happening in Alberta around early brain development, workshops and knowledge, and parent link centers were introduced here. A number of things were happening. The results in the 2013 study were horrifying. If anything, adults knew less about child development than they did in 2007. In fact, more than half of the participants in the study in 2013 got over 90% of the child development questions wrong. So it's not just that they have some things that they don't understand. They don't understand child development at all. When parents focus on school readiness, it's often misunderstood as reading, writing, and math instead of that holistic development that I showed you. We're also really sitting in a situation where we've got concern around safety, where we want to protect our children from risks. We're concerned about stranger danger. We're concerned about falling. We're concerned about harm to their egos. We want to protect them from all risks. The bottom line is screens are just such great babysitters. So screen time, the CSEP, Canadian Society for Exercise Physiologists, in 2011 finally put out guidelines for children under the age of 5. For infants up to 2 years of age, 0 screen time. None at all. And for 2 to 5-year-olds, no more than 1 hour total screen time per day. And the Canadian Pediatric Society agrees with that because they are now finding young children with more sleep problems, obesity increasing, attention and learning problems, and they're concerned about advertising leading to unhealthy food and lifestyle choices. Now there's another explosion of interest because there is a recognition that many of the social challenges that we're facing in society are actually rooted in early years. Things like poor health, mental illness, addictions, teen crime and pregnancy, poor school performance, and so on. We're discovering that toxic stress, which causes many of these things, are actually built into the developing brain in the early years. So let's focus on the early childhood years. How are they different from school age? Well, early childhood, most active period of brain development, as we just talked about. Preschool children learn through all of their senses. They need to touch, to smell, taste, listen, do. All of you know how babies put everything into their mouths because that's how they learn about what it is. They need more unstructured time than structured activity. It's very important that they have extended periods of time where they're directing the activity and the play. It's really difficult for them to learn game rules. In fact, it's believed that children can't really understand and use rules for games until they're about 7 years old. Now, they do make their own rules, but they change constantly when they find out those rules aren't working. School-age children, on the other hand, their brain from ages about 6 to 12 are pretty stable. Then there's an adolescent period of restructuring. We also are learning that about 80% of learning in school age happens through the eyes, through visual sense, not smell, taste, and touch. School-age children can accept more structured activities. They still need ample unstructured play. And we know a lot about hurried children and overstructured children. And they're able to learn and follow game rules most of the time. So that means if we look at these two things, in school age, children were used to developing lesson plans that are developed for a whole group of children. In early childhood, we really try hard to stay away from a structured lesson plan and look towards providing stimulating environments to encourage exploration and play. So preschool children learn through play, and the most important things around that play for them are the relationships that they have with the adults in that environment, the predictable, repetitive, positive experiences. And so the more experiences that they have, the more connections they build in the brain. Those connections develop from either positive experiences or negative experiences. So if you were told very early on that you aren't a good runner, that's built into your brain. And it's really hard for you to get over that if you've been repetitively told something in the early years. And you need stimulating environments to explore. So I just tossed this in. Children need the freedom and time to play. Play is not a luxury. Play is a necessity. So when learning, young children are playing and playful. They are seeking, participating, persisting, and caring. So participating is important. Young children don't learn by watching others. They like to watch others in preparation for them participating. But when we put young children in a situation where they're standing in line or sitting quietly for extended periods of time, that's not learning for them. They're very persistent. They like to repeat and do something over and over again. And they need to care about what they're doing. They need to want to do something, not because you think it's important, but because they want to do something. So what has been our journey? And PPLRT is just a short version of Preschool Physical Literacy Research Team at Mount Royal University. So in 2007, the Child Studies students, that's the program that I teach, they started all of this whole process that we've been on, whole agenda in preschool physical literacy. And in a research class of mine, they decided to conduct a survey to determine the levels of physical activity in Calgary child care centers. We were horrified. Over 75% of children ages 2 to 5 experience less than 30 minutes of physical activity during a 10-hour day. Think about that. So for 9.5 hours, those children were kept sedentary. Think about, if any of you have young children in your lives, think about how hard it is to get children to sit still. Think about what happens to children when they're required to sit still in a car seat, for example, on a long journey. Imagine keeping children still for 9.5 hours out of a 10-hour day in childcare. Well, why might this be? So in 2007, believe it or not, the participation guidelines were very proud of themselves, saying we have guidelines covering the entire lifespan from 5 to 95, because there was the assumption that preschool children were naturally active. The other problem that we had, which has still not been fixed, is that physical activity and now physical literacy education is not included in early childhood educator programs across Canada. It's not a part of that education. So how to respond? We made a decision that we would follow 3 approaches. We'd create resources, we'd do education, and we'd see what we can do to impact policy. So our first step was to create the Hop, Skip, and Jump manual. We were really proud of this, as it was our first really involved students in research, undergrad students in research project. So it was created by our second-year early learning childcare students. Then our first-year students took it out to practicum, and they tested it in practicum with their mentors who helped revise it. Every single activity in Hop, Skip, and Jump had to address barriers of limited space, time, equipment, and preparation. We've been really thrilled with Hop, Skip, and Jump. It's in a 2nd edition now, and we'll be going forward probably to a 3rd edition in another year or 2. Then, based on Hop, Skip, and Jump, we did a whole bunch of education. We taught many workshops. We went to staff meetings, presentations at conferences. ECEs all thought the activities were fun, but why would they do it? What were the benefits to engaging their children physically? They themselves weren't physically active. And weather and space were a huge barrier. Now, one of the things that's important to suggest here that is different in some of the provinces across Canada. In Alberta, we tend to have a very large proportion of our early childhood workforce are new immigrants to Canada. About 60 to 70% of all of our ECEs in Alberta are new to Canada. And many, many of those ECEs really struggle with weather. They were not raised with winter. They don't like winter. They don't know how to dress for winter. They don't know how to play with snow. They're scared to walk on the ice. It's all because it's not a part of their own upbringing, and it's a challenge for them when they come to Canada. So when we have so much winter in Alberta, and the majority of our ECEs don't know how to cope with it themselves, their decision is to keep the children inside. And so we have a huge problem with outdoor play among childcare centers in Alberta. In fact, to the point where there is a requirement in our childcare regulations to have outdoor play spaces, but there is no requirement to actually take the children out to those play spaces. Then in about 2011, 2012, we had a perfect storm. We decided we were going to work on the policy pillar. CSEC published their guidelines for physical activity for children under the age of 5 at 180 minutes per day. 3 hours of physical activity per day. In Alberta, we have what are called accreditation standards. Licensing is the bare minimum that all centers need to apply or need to meet. But Alberta put in accreditation standards, and we're so proud of us for having done that. We're proud of our government. Essentially, if you meet accreditation standards, There are a number of carrots that are offered to centers. ECEs can earn up to $6 of wage enhancement. Centers earn extra money for materials and equipment, and there's professional development money set aside for the staff. And so we now have about 95% of our childcare centers in Alberta that are accredited. In that accreditation, we recommended that physical literacy be included. We sent our students across the province. They made 30 presentations on including physical literacy in our accreditation guidelines, and we were successful. Physical literacy is 2.2 in the accreditation guidelines, and all centers who now want to be accredited must show evidence that they are learning about and providing physical literacy at the rate of 15 minutes for every hour in care for their children. And that includes all childcare, out-of-school care, family day home, and preschool programs. We're thrilled. But there was a dilemma. So we provided these resources, we taught workshops, we'd done the education, we'd impacted policy. How had we done? We wanted to see what we were doing. So we repeated our 2007 questionnaire in 2014. What did we find? ECEs themselves were more active than they were in 2007. They strongly agreed that children should be active. They said they encouraged children to be active and that they joined in play with the children. They saw few barriers to physical activity and physical literacy. But here's the dilemma. Only between 17% for infants and 31% for children ages 4 and 5 were achieving 100 minutes of physical activity. The average amount of activity in a child care center had increased from 30 minutes in 2007 to between 30 and 60 minutes. And if we think of 15 minutes per hour of care, if those children are in child care for 8 hours, they should be receiving 120 minutes of physical activity. So despite all of that work, we weren't there. So we decided to switch focus. We decided that we needed to focus on building adult capacity. We needed to support early childhood educators, and this first line should seem familiar to most of you. We wanted them to become motivated, confident, and competent to provide physical literacy for their children. That was Margaret Whitehead's 2010 very first basic definition of physical literacy: the motivation, confidence, and competence to move for a lifetime. We wanted to support ECEs to feel those same things around providing physical literacy for the children in their care. We wanted to help them understand how to provide stimulating, physically literate environments and activities, both indoors and outdoors. We recognize that they're not phys ed teachers, and I also recognize that right now Canada schools are going through a huge crisis in terms of not having phys ed teachers in the schools, that elementary schools are really going towards generalists. And I taught school as well, and so I was a music specialist when we had specialists, so I would trade off my science class and teach the other teacher's music class. But our ECEs don't have, for the majority of them, any ability to teach skills. So we don't want them teaching how to kick a ball or how to catch or how to run properly, because our ECEs themselves, because of our workforce, don't know how to do that. And so that's not what we're asking them to do. We just want them to provide a physically literate environment. So we've developed the following things. In red, they're developed, the Apple model and the preschool fundamental movement skills chart. And we're in the final phases of testing our physical literacy observation tool, the plot, and our Appleseed program. And we'll be working on a protocol for active, energetic, or risky playing. I'm just going to talk about all of these really quickly. Here's our Apple model. So because our ECEs were not physically active themselves, and if you think of many women where it is culturally or where it's culturally or religiously inappropriate to be active, physically active, we wanted to show them how physical literacy just fits into what we were teaching at the time around active play. So APPLE stands for Active Play and Physical Literacy Every Day. And in the core of our APPLE, we have that simple definition from Margaret Whitehead: motivated to move, confident to move, and competent. So that's the core of our APPLE. Around the outside is what we have been teaching for years around what does active play look like. You set up an environment that invites the child's curiosity. Once she's curious, then she's motivated to explore something. Young children repeat. They repeat and repeat. And most of you will have experienced a young child wanting to read the same bedtime story every single night for nights on end until they have that book memorized. Then they have the confidence to move on to something else. So the idea of this being a cycle is that once you build confidence, then you're more curious to move into something else. Now, we're in conversations now with PJ Naylor at UVic and with some other people in BC around expanding the idea of what active play looks like. And so that will be happening over the next little bit. But let's look at what active play means at this point. So it's how children of all ages, including adults, learn. So curiosity, exploration, repetition to confidence. What does it look like? So this is our child development lab at Mount Royal University, and we're really fortunate to have children come from our child care center to come play in our lab with our students. It's just a fabulous learning, teaching, and research facility. So on this particular day, all we did was introduce a wobble board into the lab. We just put it there on the floor. These are 4-year-olds. We didn't say anything to them. Right away, these two children on the left, there's something new in the playroom. What is that? And the little girl takes a step on it, and of course, it tips. So picture in the middle, there's the two of them. Why is this wobble board tipping? And they're trying to figure out, why did it tip? Why didn't it just stay where it was when I stood on it? And then she gets back on, and she's saying, okay, so it tips on the side. Look at that. Now we have another one who comes over and says, well, what is this? I can make it tip too. And she practiced until she was able to walk around the perimeter of that wobble board. And so all the way around and around and around. Finally, the third little girl comes over and says, that's not what you do with it. You stand in the middle and make it balanced, just like I can do. And you see her standing there perfectly balanced. And she's holding a foam block in her hand, which is an important thing to note, because then once she was fully balanced, she achieved her confidence level. She started throwing that block at a net that was set up in the playroom. Now we have yet another little girl, but notice just behind the little girl in the middle, there's still that little fellow in the gray sweatshirt. And there he is again in the final picture. He never actually stepped on the wobble board, but he was a part of this whole exploration process the entire time. And now he's acting as a spotter, because we have yet another little one stepping up onto the wobble board, and he's right there to help her balance. Look at the social development and the engagement of this while she's throwing blocks. And we ended up with 3 children standing balanced on the wobble board, with the little fellow in the gray sweatshirt acting as spotter, and other children retrieving all of the foam blocks that didn't make it into the net because it was too hard to get off the wobble board, retrieve, and go back on. So this is the cycle of active play, and it's as simple as just putting something new in the playroom. And then if you want to create a physically literate environment, what you do then is move the wobble board over to the art table or the water table, so that children are, again, being physically active while they're doing something else. So along the way in our journey came this idea of fundamental movement skills, which really appealed to us in early childhood because it's a developmental perspective. And we talk a lot about child development in the early years. And so looking at fundamental movement skills we could begin to see how they would develop over these first 6 years of life, with the idea that more complex skills build on simple skills. So, for example, most children crawl before they walk. And we really liked that concept because that relates directly to early brain development. Brain development is like building a house, and you have to build the basic parts of the house before the next part can be built on. We stuck with the original 3 categories of stability or balance, locomotor, and manipulative, although initially stability was not the first one, and we moved it up into the first position. So for us, when we look at stability as a developmental thing, here's a series of pictures to show what happens with stability. It begins with infants when they first are able to lift their legs up when they're lying on their back, or if they're on their tummy, to be able to lift their head off the floor. Sitting is the first major stability accomplishment of an infant's life, and usually happens around 5 or 6 months. Standing up on 2 feet. Parents watch for this because this is a huge step. But balance also, or stability also, includes things like being able to crouch. So this little one on the bottom left, her hands aren't touching the ground. She's just crouched down in a squat. And of course, to my great jealousy, she can also stand straight up from that squat without touching the floor. There's our little one balancing on the wobble board. And then on the bottom right, now climbing up and balancing on something. So this showed for us a developmental projection. Same sorts of things with locomotion, moving from a first crawl to the walking to steps with support, to running, to leaping from one stump to another, to being able to use wheeled toys. And manipulative, beginning in infancy from reaching and grasping an object back and forth, to then doing various things with them, throwing, catching. I love that little one in the bottom middle. You know, she knows she's going to have to catch that ball against her chest, but she's not going to watch the ball come at her while she does it. And from all of that, we were able to create a fundamental movement skills chart for preschool children. And our goal here was just to show that some skills, the body needs to be more mature before it's ready to do. That you need to build on the simple skills, and eventually you can move through the more complex skills. So once we had developed this, and this was based on the fundamental movement skills chart that was part of Sport for Life that began at age 7. And so we're looking at the first 6 years of life with our chart. So looking at that, how then could we use the Apple model and the fundamental movement skills chart to help ECEs understand where their children were in terms of their physical journey along this process? So we created the Preschool Physical Literacy Observation Tool, or PLOT, for ECEs, parents, rec leaders. And the purpose of it was to observe developmental levels of individual children with a goal to support mindful planning of activities, environments, and opportunities. So the format of the plot is based on our fundamental movement skills chart, and it's color-coded by age level. So we took the first 6 years of life, and we just divided them into 2-year increments. So infants are the first 2 years, toddlers ages 2 and 3, and preschoolers ages 4 and 5. So to use the plot, it's observation only during a play-based setting or during naturally occurring situations, such as putting on boots or putting on snow pants. And you can all think of how children in your lives have changed in their abilities to pull on their snow pants, starting from sitting on the floor or laying as infants while you put it on, sitting on the floor, pulling it on their legs, standing up, pulling it up, and eventually being able to stand up and stand on one foot and step into the snow pants with the other. So this is what the scale looks like. There it is, divided the 3 colors into the 3 age bands, infants being the first 2 years, the pink one, green the second, and blue the third. And so when we ask people to observe children, let's say you're observing a toddler, so someone who's 2 or 3 years old and would be in the green band, you may want to start back in the pink band just to make sure that all of those skills are covered off, that the child is able to do all of those things. Then you move into the green scale. And then if the child is able to do everything in the green scale, you move into the blue scale. And this would indicate precocious children, lots of development happening, some interesting things there. The rating scale that we've used is one that is common to a tool called Ages and Stages. And in Alberta and many other provinces across the country, Ages and Stages is a required tool for ECEs to complete. So we use the same scale, often, sometimes, not yet, not observable, as that Ages and Stages. We are getting some comments in our reliability testing right now, and we may look at that scale or clarify that scale, but that's where it is right now. So we are involved in the psychometric testing of the plot. We're finishing the final tests. Our data collection will be completed within the next 3 weeks. Yay, it's been a long time. So once data is collected at the end of June, we run all the stats in July. We'll make necessary revisions in August. And so we hope by fall of this year that the plot will be available for public use for free on our website. We also did some pilot testing with children with disabilities at a program here in Calgary, and the physios were extremely keen on the tool. And so we're working with them to just tweak it a little bit to make it applicable for children with physical disabilities such as cystic fibrosis, or cerebral palsy, or children with cognitive disabilities such as autism. So we hope to have that version also available later this fall. So that means that right now there are 2 early childhood tools available in the space. So ours plot is based on developmental milestones for children ages 6 to 72 months. And there's a P-play, which is just being tested now through McMaster. It's for children from 18 months to kindergarten entry. And there's a fancy sentence there, which the authors have included as to what it means. But essentially, in this particular tool, it just means that instead of comparing children to developmental milestones, as we've done in PLOT, you're comparing children to other children of the same age. So how are the children compared to others the same age? And then further supports for ECEs, and I see we're running short on time, so I'm speaking quickly. We developed what's called an Appleseeds program. We realized that when we moved into this, even with the hop, skip, and jump, it was a basic activity. Here are some things you can do with some very simple transitions into and out of and extensions. We took 12 of those activities from hop, skip, and jump and expanded them as a teaching tool into the Appleseeds program. So specifically to help ECEs understand how to put together a physical activity in the playroom. So we've taken 12 of these activities. They have 3 components. So an introductory activity helps to set the context. So for example, one of the Appleseeds activity is a squirrel tails activity involving balance. So an introductory activity would be the ECE with the children. How many of you have squirrels in your backyard? How many of you have seen them in the park? What colors are squirrels? What do their tails look like? Have you seen them climbing up the side of a tree? How do they do that? Have you seen them jumping from branch to branch? How do they do that? How many of you have seen them actually walking along a wire over the back alley or across the street? How do they do that? How do they use their tail to help them balance in each of those situations? The adult activity then would be a series of lines on the floor using masking tape to imitate a tree laying down on the ground. So the children are invited to become squirrels, and they have little felt tails coming out of the back of their trousers. And they're invited to join you in the tree. And they start walking around on the tree, trying to stay on the lines on the floor. They maybe walk heel to toe along the branches, or they might walk backwards along the branches. They might hop on one foot, depending on their age and ability. They might leap from one branch to the other branch. They might practice running and staying on the branches as part of an adult-led activity. And then for the majority of the time, the environment's set up with perhaps a number of different trees on the floor, balance beams for the children to walk on, things for them to climb, similar to climbing the tree. They might gather nuts and practice throwing them into a garbage bag or something like that. So that just shows ECEs how to actually put this into the context of their playroom. This is also in the final stages of testing and revision. We have about 35 programs across the province pilot testing the apple seeds for us. And the way we've done this is they go online, they complete a pre-survey. At that time, they're sent the first 6 activities. When they've completed those, they do a mid-survey. They receive the last 6 weeks of activities. Then they come back, and when they complete their final survey, they're given a certification, which in Alberta, they can use for accreditation to say this is what they're doing to meet the physical literacy guidelines in the accreditation standards. And I'll finish with active outdoor nature play. And this is becoming something that is increasing in popularity in Canada. Nature, forest, outdoor preschools, adventure playgrounds. In childcare, a lot of centers are trying to create natural playgrounds with things like logs and docks, the hills, tools, but there is confusion, at least in Alberta, about what centers are able to do. So the project we're just completing is on active, energetic, or risky play. We contacted about 1,000 participants. We had ECEs, parents, owners, operators of centers, health and safety inspectors, licensing officers, risk managers, et cetera, et cetera. We've come to a really interesting understanding that our regulations in Alberta are very vague and open to interpretation, and that interpretation depends on the personal comfort level of who is doing the interpretation towards risk, and whether or not they feel that something is too risky for a playground. So for many of our licensing officers, the photo that I've included here would simply not be acceptable. And so we're looking to develop some kind of collaborative protocol document. That won't happen until next year, which would be very clear about what the regulations are that centers need to follow, some examples of what that would look like, and some examples of what would not be allowed, how to ensure that there's no danger of entrapment, entanglement, that there are safe fall surfaces, and just a guideline for centers. Currently, there is the participation position statement on active outdoor play, and this is a quote: access to active play in nature and outdoors with its risks is essential for healthy child development. However, our Alberta Health Services, our health and safety officers, countered. They found several things in that document they were very uncomfortable with. They've countered it with an internal document that we can't get hold of. We just know they don't agree with the position statement. So that's where we came to the collaborative protocol that hopefully health will be involved with us. We do know that in BC, the Director of Licensing has created a standard of practice for active play, which will be effective September 1st of 2017, and we're hoping to use that as our model for our own protocol document. So all in all, an exciting time in ECE. Thank you. Over to you, Alex.
All right, thanks everyone. So we had one question come in during that, and we're happy to take more questions if you'd like to type them into the question box, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can ask your question to Dawn directly right now. Lots of exciting stuff in ECE, so thank you, Dawn, for sharing. We're excited. I know there's some great work happening in Ontario and BC that will be visible in the coming or be shared and launched in the coming months. So great work happening, and excited to see how this really impacts the early years and across the country.
And I want to add Nova Scotia is doing some really good stuff as well in the area of early childhood, and has been for the last few years. So they're another province to be watching. they've done a really good job with developing a curriculum framework for childcare that we in Alberta actually used as a model for our own framework. So Nova Scotia is also a province to be watching.
All right, so Dawn, we have one quick question. As somebody asked for your email. Are you open to receiving emails?
Right there, D Clark, without an E, at mtroyal.ca.
Great. Maybe we can just leave it at that slide for a minute even. And then a question also came up is somebody asked if it's possible to get a sample of the questions asked during the benchmark studies to provide to the parents in their area.
Absolutely. If you Google Alberta Benchmark Study, if you Google, it will actually come up to, you can find the study as well as you find the questionnaire as well as the report around the questionnaire.
Great. Any other questions? Feel free. You can raise your hand if you would like to ask Dawn a question directly, or feel free to type it in.
And if whoever asked about the Alberta benchmarks, if you're having trouble finding it, please just email me and I'll send you the direct link. My goodness, no questions. Oh, I'm not used to this. University students have lots of discussion and debate. I talk too long and you're all ready to go. That's the problem.
Oh, okay. We have one hand raised. Just one moment. I'm going to. So Jen, we have unmuted you. You can ask your question now. Thanks.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Dawn, this is Jen Carson. I'm a librarian in Woodstock, New Brunswick, and I'm actually writing a book on physical literacy in library programming because libraries are moving more into doing more movement-based programs with children as well as with adults, like yoga and things like that. I'm just wondering if any of your research has come across libraries doing things. I know you're talking mostly about schools, but I'd be interested in hearing of anything that you've done to do with library work.
Jen, I really would like to connect with you. We actually have some of the feasibility testing that we did with the plot was through the Calgary Public Library. They are really focusing on physical literacy and developing active place-based centers indoors and outdoors in every single library in Calgary. Hop, Skip, and Jump is available, and we're developing workshop materials for the facilitators of their programs. I would be more than happy to link you with Kristen Duke, who is the head of the Early Literacy Program for Calgary Public Libraries. I think it'd be a fabulous connection.
Okay, so yeah, that's great, Dawn. Thank you. I'll send you an email. Yeah, Noah Lestra and I, he's at the University of North Carolina. We actually did a survey, which we just released the findings in June, early June, of all of the libraries in North America that are taking part in movement-based programs. So, yeah, I'd like to connect with you about that. I'll send you an email and we could talk some more. Thanks so much.
I think that's, and that's the most beautiful connection from physical literacy to literacy in general is to work through the libraries. I'm thrilled with that connection.
Yeah, well, my whole book premise is we're working towards libraries being centers for whole person literacy, so focusing, on digital literacy, financial literacy, all of the things that people need in order to lead healthy, happy lives, and moving away from libraries being just seen as kind of book depositories.
Exactly, yes. Very interesting. Love to talk with you more, Jen.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thanks. Now, Jen is muted. We have a couple more questions. Dawn, somebody asked, does your work add to the EDI work from the Offered Child Study Center? And that was a question from Vicki Harbour.
Yes. Hi, Vicki. So EDI, we did quite a bit of work with the EDI, and there are a number of questions in the EDI around physical activity and physical development. The problem that we have in Alberta at the moment is we were the last province in Canada to adopt the EDI. We had a fabulous program for 5 years where we tested the EDI throughout all of Alberta, with the University of Alberta, where Vicki is from, as the main repository. And then our Conservative government apparently did not like the results of the EDI, which showed that Alberta children were below the national average when they were 5 years old, and the EDI has been cancelled in Alberta. Our current government, NDP government, has promised to bring it back, but it hasn't come back yet.
Great. So another question we had from the St. Bernadette staff, they asked, how do we get around making parents understand not putting limitations on children's play outdoors?
Oh, yeah. And we've started talking about that. We've actually we're doing a little bit of work with the City of Calgary around parents' perceptions of outdoor play and risk. And so there will be several presentations at the upcoming International Play Association Conference in Calgary in September on outdoor play and risky outdoor play. We found in our particular study that if communication with parents happened right at the very beginning around what kinds of activities would be encouraged in the center and how we would communicate that there were fewer problems for centers. But we also, I think, really need to go back to the early brain development and the importance of allowing children to learn how to manage their own risks in order to build resilience. We've also been cautioned by our health and safety inspectors not to criticize parents by using terms like helicopter parent or bubble wrapping their children, that we need to respect the fear that parents have for their child's safety and begin to approach it in other more positive directions. So those are some quick answers that I can give you, but that's going to be a major focus, I think, for the next few years.
Okay, great. Now, one more question is, well, we have a few questions actually. Are we able to access the hop, skip, and jump manual somewhere? That was from Carolyn Gillespie.
Yes, so the hop, skip, and jump, and I don't have the website up here, so I'll just, hop, skip, and jump is available two ways. You can download it online from our website, which is www.mtroyal.ca, so the first part of my email, /wellbeing. And on there you'll find the hop, skip, and jump available for full download. You can also order a printed version in plasticized laminated paper, so it survives in a playroom with children with paints, et cetera, at Mount Royal bookstore. So if you just go online to MRU's website and to their bookstore, you can order it there. It's about $30, I think. The joy of being able to order it through the bookstore is that the royalties that the bookstore charges actually comes back to us for further work on our physical literacy research. So, you know, we've made it available for free, but the royalties are lovely.
Great, thanks. I've been responding to the questions, so people are seeing the responses as well.
Oh, perfect.
So another question, what advice do you have for when parents are not comfortable with their child participating in risky play in the program? That's from Hannah Taves.
That's from who, sorry?
Hannah Taves.
Again, I think it needs to be a process of upfront communication, helping parents understand about holistic child development, what that looks like, what's necessary. There are some really good little videos that are available around early brain development by going to, there's a center in Harvard called Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. They've got some amazing videos and short papers written in lay language. They're communication devices. And we also have some of those available at the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative website here in Alberta. That's sponsored by a family foundation. So just even sometimes sharing these short, quick little videos with parents at parent meetings, meet and greets, that sort of thing. Why is physical development an important part of building a healthy brain? What does physical development look like? Really for parents, it's just helping them understand a little bit more about child development. And now that we've had these two results from the Alberta benchmark studies, we realize that beyond understanding when children should learn to sit up and start to walk, parents truly don't understand the physical development journey for their preschool children. And so how do we support them with that? A lot of the centers that we work with are now starting to put together little tidbits that go into the parent newsletters every month, little videos of the children at play and some of the things that they're learning, and comments about how that helps them develop a healthy brain. Those sorts of things are important for parents. Lots of documentation in the child care center or wherever the program is that parents are having their children that just show what you're doing and why. So how do children learn through play? What are children learning when we're having them do this? Why is this important for them? And so it really just becomes a parent education program by showing them how important this is to their children's development. It's going to be a long process.
Great,
the more communication, the more communication, the better.
Thanks, and I put that information you just said into the to share with everyone, so people should see it. We have one further question here. It says, do you have any suggestions or know of any physical literacy programs offered at community centers which involve learning by playing? And this is from Tony Tay.
Can you just say the first part of the question again, Alice, please?
He asked, any physical literacy programs offered at community centers which involve learning by playing?
Oh, geez. Well, I know certainly in Alberta, most of the cities run recreation programs. And like for preschool children, I know certainly for Calgary, they have summer playgrounds, mobile playground programs, and they're actually doing a fabulous mobile adventure playground, which we're so thrilled about. It's just amazing. And some of the libraries, as we heard from Jen, are actually beginning to offer more physically active programming for children in the libraries. Community centers, that one, you know, we're still kind of stuck, I think, with a lot of the parenting programs being more around the typical literacies. So it's 1, 2, 3, grow, or you know, the parent, child, mother, goose reading programs, less focused on physical literacy. But I think a lot of what's being offered through parks and recreation departments in cities would be a good place to start.
Great.
We also have a program, a society here in Alberta, and I'm sure there are ones all across Canada, on environmental outdoor education. So here in Alberta, the program is called Get Outside and Play. And it's just involving children and families in outdoor play in a variety of ways. And I'm sure Alberta belongs to a national coalition, so I'm sure there are other kinds of Get Outside and Play programs across the country.
Okay, that's all of our questions for today, so thanks. Oh, wait, I have one more question. Sorry, Amanda has a question. I'm just going to unmute her so she can ask it. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Amanda. You're unmuted.
Yep, I'm here.
Ask your question.
Can you hear me? I was just wondering, if we're working with kids age 6 and 7, and we notice that they haven't reached milestones they should by that age, should we continue to offer the same programming as other 6 and 7-year-olds, or should we go back and offer more fundamental programming for those kids?
That's a really, really interesting question. And of course, we, in the early childhood field, are rather fond of saying, you know, by the time a child is 6 or 7, if they're not doing these basic skills that we suggest are developmentally appropriate for preschoolers. It's a remedial program that's required. So I would encourage you to broaden the types of activities that you do. I wouldn't necessarily put a remedial program per se in place, but I'd certainly broaden the activities so that the more fundamental skills are introduced and practiced in the setting. And there are ways of doing that that can still be very game-focused or activity-focused, and the children who have those skills aren't necessarily noticing, perhaps, that these are more basic skills, or that some children are doing more basic skills. There's ways of broadening the activities so that you start with something more simple, but absolutely, if they haven't developed those skills by the age of 6 or 7, the ones that we feel they should have by then, they won't develop them without an opportunity to practice them.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Great, that's all of our questions for today. Thanks everyone for your engagement. That was excellent. Dawn, if you mind just moving to the next slide, a reminder that we have other Learn to Play webinars coming up over the next few months if you're interested. The next one is in July, and it's about helping change happen. And then August, we have Learn to Play in Schools. The date might change on that one a little, but we'll keep you posted in our communications. And then we're going to highlight some of the innovation grants that have been funded by RBC Learn to Play in September. The Helping Change Happen, we'll have the registration link sent out shortly, and that's about helping change happen in community and supporting some of the organizational systems that need to be changed. Yeah, and you can register by the links on the website there. So that's all for today. Thanks everyone for your engagement, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everybody.